Snack and Learn webinar. Today we're going to talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and more specifically we're going to talk about the tool called Mylius, which basically is a tool that puts the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals at the heart of every project. So, who's presenting today? The picture on the right, that's me. I'm called Kasper Møller Nielsen, and I'm currently working as a climate change specialist here at WSP in Denmark in the Department of Sustainability, Energy and Climate Change. So what are we talking about today? First of all, we're going to give a brief introduction to sustainability and SDGs in general, and then we're going to talk a bit about why they are so important. And then we're going to relate them to the Future Ready program. And then, most importantly, we're going to talk about Mylius, which basically was the tool that puts SDG at the heart of every project. I have brought two different case studies that I will present, and then at last we have a Q&A session where Søren Gabriel will be able for questions as well. So basically what we're going to do today is that we're going to take the talk from being about buzzwords to real action instead. So what is sustainability and what are the SDGs? Well, sustainability was a theorem brought to life in the Brundtland report back in 1987, which basically defines it as sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with this definition. And an introduction to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs. This is how we interpret them in Denmark and in Scandinavia, and we use them basically as common language. The SDGs, they are meant to be the successor, and they are the successor to the Millennium Development Goals and are projected to run from year 2015 until year 2030. The main issues covered in the SDGs are a reduction in poverty in general, that means over the entire globe, and while reducing the amount of poverty in the world, we are also having a sustainable development. And that sustainable development is predicted to be both in developing and developed countries. The main stakeholders in the SDGs are most government, states, NGOs, and international organizations and companies. It is important to say that there is a difference between the SDGs around the globe, meaning there is a difference in poverty, for instance, meaning poverty in Denmark or poverty in Scandinavia is a bit different to poverty in developing countries. So, how are sustainability and SDGs, how are they related to the Future Ready program? Some of you might have heard of the Future Ready program, but for the few of you that haven't, the Future Ready program is a WSP Global Innovation program that basically just challenges and inspires all of us to advise and to design programs that should be ready both for present living, but also the future as well. There's a difference between the Future Ready approach and the SDG approach. Since the Future Ready approach, it's basically built upon constraints and future solutions, whereas the SDG is more of a target-based tool. Most of you are probably working within the certification of BREEAM, LEED, or in Denmark called DGNB. It is important to say that the Mylius tool is not a certification tool, but it is meant as a dialogue tool instead. At the very bottom of your screen now, you can see 4 icons ranging from climate to society to technology and resources. These are the 4 main trends described in the Future Ready program. And it's basically about asking the right questions to your project. So how will, in terms of climate, how will your project, your infrastructure, how will your community, how would it hold up against the effects of both present climate change, but also future global warming and the effects It's about asking the right questions in the society about how we move around our cities, how do we design our neighborhoods when they all are impacted by the changes we are seeing both today and in the future with regards to social and cultural norms. Everyone knows that technology is developing and is changing fast, and therefore it is important to tackle how you can incorporate that in a project. And the last one, the resources, it's just a matter of changing the way we think, the way we see resources. It's a matter of just trying to produce more with less being used. And these are the 4 main trends in the Future Ready program. And then you might think, how are they related to the SDGs? And I've tried to relate them here. And as you can see, most of the Future Ready trends actually aligns pretty well with most of the SDGs as well. It's not supposed to say when you have a Future Ready program, it is covering all of the SDGs, but many of the SDGs are closely related to the Future Ready and vice versa. So, talking about the Mylius tool, it is basically a tool that should show us how we can incorporate the SDGs into our project, how we can think the SDGs into our projects. As I've said before, it is not an accounting tool. It's never intended to be an accounting tool. It's more of a dialogue-based tool where you can work with both the goals and the targets on just overall terms. So in the end, you might get more sustainable and better projects. In Denmark at the moment, we are seeing other consulting groups trying to develop tools that could put 2 lines under whether or not a project is sustainable. But what we are actually experiencing at the moment is it more of a challenge to connect the goals and the targets, which often are relatively ambitious, to actual solutions. And this is why we have invented the Mylius tool. So basically, you can say that the Mylius tool, it's about acting instead of reacting to future problems. The Mylius tool itself have been divided into a 3-step process, starting off with the starting point. This is where you sit down at the very beginning of a project, maybe looking at tender requirements and saying, okay, where are we and how do we align ourselves and how are we contributing to the SDGs? Once you've sit down and assessed that, you would go to the objective part. And this is where you are being ambitious. This is where you're setting your targets with the project. This is where we are trying to be as sustainable as possible. And we are writing down all of our actions in order to align ourselves with our goals. And once we have done that, we would carry out the project. And in the end, we would evaluate our project and see how we did in terms of the SDGs. What you are seeing on your screen now is a picture of the interface of the Mylius tool. As you can see, it is a fairly simple tool, and that was the intention as well. At the left corner of the Mylius, you can see a subheader called starting point. I have put a small red arrow just below it, and this is where we begin. That was the first step I talked about before. Right below that, I have highlighted the SDG number 13, the climate action one. And since I'm working with climate change at daily, this is one of my key interests, and that was the reason I chose that one for today. And at the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the same SDG, the climate action one, and a brief introduction to what this SDG is about. And in this case, it is about taking urgent action to combat climate change and the impacts that follows. And right below that, you can see a subheader called action. And this is where we describe our actions, our current actions that contributes to the SDGs. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, how should I rate, how should I assess how we are doing at the moment? And for that, we have made an assessment scale. You can see at the right-hand corner of your screen now, which ranges from -1 to 5, where 0 and 1 corresponds to no or a negative impact, and 5 is an outstanding impact, an outstanding contribution to the SDGs. Moving a bit up, right next to the action section, we have the SDG section. And this is where we have described what this SDG is about. It is taken directly from the SDG Action App itself. And in this case, we have described it as goal number 13 is about finding solutions that could fix climate change. In this case, it is both in terms of the mitigation side and the adaptation side as well. And right next to that, you have the target section, and that is taken directly from the SDGs itself. And here we are talking about, in terms of the SDG number 13, the climate action one, we are talking about strengthen the resilience, strengthen the adaptive capacity. We are talking about integrate climate change measures into policies, and about improving education and raise awareness about climate change. And if you're sitting down now thinking, okay, how should we get started with that? We have aligned you with some ideas as well about what can we do in order to contribute to this SDG. And in this case, you could maybe offset your company's carbon emissions, or if not the entire company, the carbon emissions related to the project itself. And that makes you more sustainable and contributing to SDG number 13. This was the starting point. Now moving on to the objective point. And this is where we're starting to get ambitious. As you can see on the wheel, we are now contributing way more to the SDGs. And while we are being ambitious, we are supposed to write all of our actions to achieve the goal, meaning what objectives are required to achieve the goals that we have set. And this is very important to be very specific about the actions that you make in order to align yourself to contribute to the SDGs. And once you've been ambitious, once you've written down all of your actions, your timelines, accountability, and how you should measure it, you would carry out the project itself. And once you have carried out the project, you would reach the evaluation subheader. And this is where you finally evaluate, saying, okay, how did we actually do on this project? And in many cases, you will actually see that once you've finally done the project and carry out the evaluation, you're actually performing a bit better than you initially thought was possible, even though you were being ambitious in the objective part. And once you're done, you would press the Get Report button down here, and then you would get the entire report once you have done this evaluation. And one of the really smart things about this is that the outcome will be an editable Word document, meaning that if you have made any typing errors, you can fix that. So that was a lot of non-practical stuff, but now we are trying to put it all into practice. And we're going to start off by talking about case study number 1, which is the Værebrobassinet. It is a stormwater reservoir located just northwest of Copenhagen. It is located in a fairly complex area right in between social housing. There's a school nearby, and you even have a public swimming pool right next to it. The overall objective of this case study was, first of all, remove all of the sediment, all of the sludge that you can see on the picture on the right, and then we should find extra capacity of around 2,500 cubic meters. And normally you would just dig a deep hole into the ground, but that was not the smart thing to do in this case, as you will see in a bit. I've also brought you the starting point Mylius bill, which really shows that we have a small impact on, first of all, clean water, and then second of all, climate action and life on land. But then we sat down along with the Mylius tool thinking, okay, how can we make this a better project? And we basically went out there, talked to the locals, collaborating with all of the nearby stakeholders. So first of all, we fixed the issue with the increased volume, meaning that we created the extra capacity. We improved the sedimentation within the actual stormwater reservoir itself. And we listened to the neighbors. Would you like some more sunlight? Yes, they would. We talked to some locals that was sort of really into nature and biodiversity. We enhanced the biodiversity by planting some wildflowers. We listened to the local school. Would you like some space for outdoor cheating? Yes, they would. and that would naturally lead to play as well. And we did all that while lowering the cost, since we did not have to get rid of all the extra dirt. So basically, by taking Mylius in action, we turned a probably boring stormwater reservoir located behind a fence into a wild, recreational, sustainable area. And we did all that by lowering the costs. As you can see in the 3 wheels that I've brought here, the starting point I talked about before, and the standard solution just to dig a deep hole and get rid of all of the sludge. There was the normal thing to do, but by using Mylius and thinking all of the SDGs into the project, we ended up with the evaluation seen on the right-hand side of your screen now, which is quite a bit better than initially. Moving on to case study number 2. Now we are moving from just northwest of Copenhagen to just southwest of Copenhagen. And here we have the cloudburst handling project in Karensminde. It is located in a fairly dense urban area of around 10 acres, and the overall objective of this project was to create around 15,000 cubic meters of retention capacity. The budget of the project itself was just above 10 million euros. And one of the important things to say about this project is that it is one of around 300 climate adaptation projects that should be carried out in the municipality of Copenhagen over the next 20 years. So we sat down the starting point, we aligned ourselves with the 2 SDGs seen on your screen now, number 6 and number 13, and said, okay, these are the SDGs that we actually are contributing to at the moment. And then we sat down thinking, okay, we can do this project smarter and make it a better project, especially for the local inhabitants and stakeholders. And this is where we ended up being. In the final evaluation, we ended up contributing to way more of the SDGs than initially thought, by improving the health and well-being, moving the schools and the education into the actual park itself. And we did all that with aligning ourselves with the overall objective of getting these 15,000 cubic meters of retention capacity. This is not the 2 only cases that we have used the Mylius tool. We have used it in a variety of different cases. I've brought some of them here. It varies from being from the utility company of a city called Hillerød, where we just align the expectations between the stakeholders, and then we used it to communicate the ambitions of both the municipality and the utility company. And then we used it in the Hyllegård Høje, which is a housing association located in the countryside. And we just used the Mylius tool just to brainstorm on ideas on how can we contribute more to the SDGs. And that led to a manual on how can we design future houses that could be more sustainable, and how can we design residential development in a more sustainable way. And the final example is for the Sjælsø Management Group, where we used the Mylius tool itself to create a sustainability strategy for them, and just use the tool in overall strategy planning. So, just in conclusion, how are we using Mylius here in Denmark? We are basically using it as a tool, as a dialogue tool between at least 2 stakeholders, or happily many more. And we are seeing it just being commonly used to communicate all of the actions and the contributions to the SDGs that one may have. It is a really good way of just using the SDGs, using the sustainable term to define a sustainable direction of a project. As I've said before, it is not meant to be a certification tool. It's not meant to be a sustainability accounting tool, but it's meant to be a tool that expands the knowledge of both the client, ourselves, regarding the SDGs in general. So in overall terms, we see it as an opportunity to move from just solving a project into develop and define the project, just taking a step up the ladder and getting a better overview of the project. And the overall aim is just having better projects. Yes, and now we are reaching the end of my contribution to this webinar. If you have any questions or if you want access to the Mylius tool itself, please feel free to contact me on the detail listed on your very screen now. I will always be happy to apply to any emails or even to a phone call. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasper, for a fantastic presentation. So before moving into the Q&A period, I would like again to remind attendees to enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar platform, and the PDF is available to download in the handout box on the dashboard. So we start with the first question. Is it a comprehensive task to use the tool?
I think I would just answer that. I'd say it varies. It could take anything from just being 2 hours just to set the overall goals, and it could take more than a week. It really much depends on how quick you are to describe the actions that you would need in order to contribute to the SDGs itself.
Thank you. Next question, is it for everyone to use in terms of understanding and using the tool?
Yeah, initially we thought it was something that everyone could use. It would be a tool for the man on the street, let's say. But if you really want something out of this tool, if you really want to use it on the best possible level, we actually experienced that it is a really good idea to use a consultant for that. Both because we have, let's say, the expertise within the sustainability part, but also because we have sort of the expertise within project specific competences.
Thank you. Next question. Have you used the tool to convince clients to move beyond the initial option?
Yeah, I would say the værbrobassinet, the stormwater reservoir, was one of the really good, I'd say, example of that, meaning that you start off with the overall objective that we receive from the client. Just, okay, dig a deep hole in the ground, get rid of all of the sludge and find extra capacity. And then the actual tool was a sort of an eye-opener of seeing how sustainable can you actually make a project while aligning with the old objective that the client came up with.
Thank you. Next question. How do you converse the SDG in local context throughout the tool?
I think that's a reference to the first thing I said about sustainability and SDGs and how poverty sort of varies throughout the globe. And I'd say regarding that, we actually in Denmark at the moment, we are sort of trying to translate the SDGs, which are made for the entire globe. We are trying to translate that to sort of Denmark or Scandinavia specific problems in terms of education, in terms of poverty, etc., etc.
Thank you. There is a question about just a clarification about the criteria that you score. So on what criteria do you score -1 to 5 each goal at each stage?
I'm not sure I'm entirely sure what's meant. It is a dialogue tool. You do not have this, let's say, 2 lines beneath what is 2, what is 3 on the assessment scale. But I'd say everyone could see there's a difference between the værbroparken example and how we are contributing to that. Do you have anything to add to that, Søren?
Yeah, I would say it is difficult because the score would depend on the group scoring the project or the ideas. But I think the basic idea about it is that we have to use this tool to make, in this case, our clients discuss the SDGs and how we can use and work with the SDGs in the project. It doesn't really make a difference if we score 2 or 4 on a specific goal. The important thing is that we have a discussion with the client. How could this goal be important within your project, and how could we contribute to fulfill the goal or get closer to the goal. So the actual score, the precise score, is not the important part. I would say that if the difference between the scores of different goals, we use that to decide which goals we should be most ambitious on.
Thank you.
But the funny thing is, just another thing, the funny thing is that when we do this together with our clients, a lot of them, they're going into a project maybe with a focus on 4 goals or 6 goals because they can't see themselves in any of the other goals. But in our translation of the goals, we not only translate into a Danish context, but also into a project context. So if we're, for instance, working with a transport company that build a new transport facility, in advance, we have tried to translate the goals into goals that are relevant for transportation facility. And at the same time, of course, discussing ahead of the workshop, which solution could we use to fulfill the goals. And that way, it becomes a kind of an expert tool. I would say that the clients are better off including us in the workshop and the discussion than if they try to do it themselves, because they might be experts within, I mean, standard solution for transportation, but if they involve us, we are experts within sustainable solution and transportation facilities.
Thank you. We'll take the last question. Do you see this tool being used in the humanitarian sector as well?
I'd say that'd be just a question for you, Søren.
No, we haven't seen it in the humanitarian sector yet, but still we are discussing it with some of the municipalities, and some of the goals, some of what we used to call the softer goals, like about education and poverty and so on. We've actually succeeded in some really heavy projects to convince our clients to work with these goals. We have something called social clauses, that where you in a project you can define that when the project is going to run, you have to include some local citizens, or you have to have people which are out of the job market involved also, and so on and so on. So we use it for a lot of different things.
Thank you. We have additional questions which will be followed up directly by Kasper. So we are at the end of our webinar session. Please feel free to follow up directly with Kasper via the contact details shown on the screen. And I would like to thank all attendees for joining today, and thank you, Kasper and Søren, for a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everyone. I will wrap up the webinar now. Thank you.